My name is Iona Conacher. I was born Iona Moir in 1927. All my life, I've been reluctant to talk about it because it's been a source of music hall jokes and that sort of thing. It was a beautiful day in early October, so we went down from the Drumnadrochit side to the far end at Fort Augustus, and we started to come back on the Foya side, just about opposite Urquhart Castle, where the road was very low and down near the water, almost level with the water with just a little wall separating it from a small beach. We came, out past some trees, and my aunt, who was in the back of the car with me, and said, "Oh, look, there's something in the water." So we stopped the car and looked, and we said, "Goodness, it must be the monster." Because there, maybe about 300 yards out, the loch was flat calm, was this apparent animal with 3 humps and a long neck and a sort of horse's head. It was rippling in the water and dipping its head in and out and in and out and in and out of the water as if it was fishing. The loch gets deep very quickly, and it was out in the deep water. And a baker's van came along, so he stopped the van and said, Look at this." And he said, "Oh, yes." He'd seen it several times because he was driving on the loch every day, and he had field glasses with him. And all of a sudden, it stopped and went at great speed away from us, over towards Urquhart Castle, and put up a great wash. It was going so fast. But when it got near the other side, it turned round and came straight back to where it had been before. And it was coming so fast. Of course, we were down on the beach by this time. I can remember stepping back to get out of the way because it seemed to be coming back so fast. It was a little frightening, but when it reached the point where it had been before, it stopped and started this dipping its head in and out of the water again. My mother thought it was about 15 feet long, from nose to the end of the third hump. It was pretty big. I've wondered all my life what it might have been. If we had had a camera with us, we could have had a wonderful picture of this. We must have watched it for about 20 minutes. My sister had decided to go on a bicycle ride that day, so we decided, well, we'd better go. So we drove away and left it sitting there in the water. We left the creature in the water. Nobody had a cine camera in those days. My mother did have a camera, but of course it was back at home. Cameras were used for taking photographs of friends in the garden. You didn't carry them about with you for no particular reason. If we had a camera, what a photo we could have taken.
Iona's voice carries the soft lilt of the Highlands as she recalls her own experience at Loch Ness. She speaks of a quiet day by the water, the kind of day when the loch lies still and reflective, as if holding its breath. She describes the shape, dark, deliberate, breaking the surface, the way it moved with purpose rather than drifting. The moment had a strange stillness, as though the world around her paused to watch. Her account is unhurried, deliberate. She remembers the feeling in her chest, the instinctive realization that she was seeing something she couldn't explain. 1936. It is a year standing between 2 eras. The scars of the Great War are still fresh, yet the shadow of the next conflict is already stretching across Europe. In Britain, the nation is caught in the drama of King Edward VIII's abdication crisis. Newspapers fill their front pages with photographs of Wallis Simpson, the American divorcee, who would change the course of the monarchy. In Spain, civil war erupts. Idealists and opportunists from across Europe flock to fight or report from the front lines as the world tests its appetite for another great conflict. The Berlin Olympics become a stage for ideology and defiance as Jesse Owens wins 4 gold medals, shattering Hitler's vision of Aryan supremacy in front of a global audience. Across the Atlantic, America completes the Hoover Dam, a monument to human engineering and ambition. In Britain, the BBC launches the world's first public television service, a flickering, grainy beginning to a new medium. And in the Scottish Highlands, far from the noise of politics and war, the deep waters of Loch Ness hold their own quiet drama. The early 1930s had seen an explosion of interest in the Loch Ness Monster. Newspaper headlines, dramatic photographs, and tales from locals and visitors alike had transformed this long, narrow body of water into an international curiosity. By 1936, that initial media frenzy had eased, but the watchers remained. Journalists still visited in hopes of a fresh story. Amateur naturalists patrolled the shoreline, and the locals, farmers, fishermen, and shopkeepers lived with the legend in their backyard. The loch itself was unchanged, 23 miles of dark, peaty water, often cold and windswept even in summer. Mist could arrive in minutes, erasing the opposite shore. Light could play tricks, turning ordinary waves into strange shapes. But now and then, something moved in a way that didn't fit the rhythm of wind and water. Early sightings, June 1936. The first flurry of reports in 1936 came in late June. On the 20th, several people described disturbances on the loch's surface. Large, dark shapes breaking the water before slipping beneath again. The Northern Chronicle carried brief but intriguing accounts, noting the apparent size and speed of the object. The very next day, Sunday the 21st, Miss H. McFay and Mr. J. Fraser were cycling along the eastern shore toward Foyers. The weather was overcast, the air cool, and the loch a flat sheet of grey. Midway along the road, they stopped, drawn to movement in the water. There, in the centre of the loch, was a large object moving steadily toward Urquhart Castle. The water around it churned and splashed, unlike any boat or drifting log. They watched for several minutes before it slowed, stopped, and sank beneath the surface without a ripple. Skeptics suggest this could have been the wake of a passing vessel, distorted by the shape of the loch and lingering in the still air. But the witnesses insisted on the purposeful movement and sudden submergence, details harder to explain by wave action alone. By September, the loch had quietened, but not for long. On the 9th, J. McIntosh reported an encounter to the Inverness Courier, describing a large, dark shape in the water. Just over a week later, on the 17th, C. Campbell added his own sighting. Then, on the 22nd of September, came something unusual: moving images. Malcolm Irvine, a Glasgow filmmaker, had travelled to the loch to capture its atmosphere for a cinema newsreel. On that day, the story goes, he spotted movement on the water near Foyers and began to film. The footage, later shown in cinemas, was said to show a long-necked creature crossing the loch. Audiences leaned forward in the darkened theatres, straining to make out the details on the grainy black and white screen. Critics pointed out the distance, the indistinct shapes, and the possibility that what Irvine captured was nothing more than a boat. Supporters argued that the film showed a rhythmic, living motion inconsistent with a vessel or driftwood. The truth remains as elusive as the creature itself. Earlier that same month, an artist named Alistair Dallas, working near Drumnadroshit, claimed a close-range encounter not on the water, but on land. He said he came upon a bulky, low-slung animal hauled out near the shore, head down as if feeding. Dallas sketched what he saw on the spot, noting a long, tapering neck and an oddly formed mouth that looked suited to pulling weed from the stones. The body looked heavy and fleshy rather than sleek. The proportions more like a powerful amphibious animal than a fish. Decades later, when researchers asked about his drawing and the original couldn't be found, Dallas redrew the creature from memory. In both versions, the same details recur. The strong forebody, the long neck rising from a broad back, and a head that isn't the neat, stylized silhouette we expect from the popular Nessie image, but something rougher, more workmanlike, an animal built for foraging rather than posing for photographs. Some who've studied his sketches point to the way the head is angled down, the mouth close to the rocks, as if tugging at strands of green. Others note the strange lobes or folds around the mouth in some renderings, details that make the creature look almost ungainly, even shabby. It is not the elegant plesiosaur of postcards. It is a heavy, practical thing, engaged in the business of feeding. Skeptical explanations exist. At the water's edge, a stag or hind can seem seal-like at certain angles, and deer do graze shoreline weed. In poor light or drizzle, an animal turning broadside can look larger than it is. A sudden bound can look like a lunge toward the water. Seals are also possible visitors, however occasional, and a grey seal's head and shoulders can, for a moment, resemble a thick neck and hump, especially if seen at very close range with the mind racing to make sense of it. Dallas insisted what he drew was neither deer nor seal, and that he was near enough to take in the proportions clearly. Whether you accept it or not, his drawings add a different texture to the year, a creature not just coursing through the loch, but clambering onto its margins to feed. September 29th, Miss Jobson. Just a week later, on the 29th, Miss Jobson added her own report. Another sighting of a dark, moving form, breaking the surface before vanishing into the depths. October, the Moir sighting. By October 1936, the year's sightings had already ranged from fleeting glimpses to film on the cinema screen, and even a strange animal sketched on land. But on a grey autumn afternoon east of Foyers, 5 people were about to have what would become one of the most detailed and discussed encounters in the history of the Loch Ness mystery. Inverness.
April 10th, 1955. Dear Mrs. White, as I have often told you, I once saw the Loch Ness Monster. It happened on an October afternoon in 1936 when Mrs. Grant Shugley was driving her car from Foyers to Inverness. With her were my mother-in-law, my sister, daughter, and myself. About 3 miles east of Foyers, my sister suddenly saw the monster and attracted our attention to it. We scrambled out of the car and ran to the edge of the loch, where we had a clear and uninterrupted view. At that time, the trees and bushes at this point were sparse. We stood and watched the monster for 14 minutes. A slight drizzle was falling, the loch looked grey, the sky was grey, and the colour of the creature was a very dark grey, very clear and well contrasted against the background of water and sky. The monster was resting on the surface of the loch, facing towards Inverness, and the length appeared to us to be about 30 feet. It was difficult to judge the exact length or the distance from us, but it was near enough to afford an excellent view. There were 3 humps, the middle one the largest, the one behind the neck the smallest. The neck was long and slender, the head small and without any discernible features. Quite often the head dipped into the water as if the creature were feeding, or perhaps just amusing itself. While we watched in breathless excitement, and almost afraid to whisper to each other, the monster suddenly turned and shot across the loch towards Urquhart Castle. All the time the top of one of the humps was just visible above the water, or it may have been the head, and a tremendous wash was put up. After travelling a long way across the loch, the monster suddenly turned and came back to the same spot where it had previously been. It came right towards us, and at such great speed that we involuntarily all stepped backwards. It came to rest at the same place as before, and remained quite still, resting on the water. This time the humps were not so much in evidence, but the head and neck remained well up out of the water. If we only had a camera, what pictures we might have taken. One of the finest opportunities so far offered was lost. I have recently returned to the place where we stood, but because of the dense growth of trees, it was difficult to locate the exact spot. My companions all remember the occasion vividly, and we consider ourselves fortunate to be among those who have actually seen the Loch Ness Monster. I enclose a drawing of what we saw. All kind regards, yours sincerely, Marjory Moir.
For believers, the Moir sighting is a model case. Multiple witnesses, a prolonged view, clear conditions, and a remarkably consistent account. Few Nessie reports tick so many boxes. Yet hardened skeptics, such as Ronald Binns, urge caution. In Loch Ness Reloaded, Binns notes that even vivid, confident testimony can be undermined by misperception. he draws a direct comparison to a sighting 33 years later by a woman he calls TJ and her two friends. Like Moir's party, TJ's group were adamant they had seen a living creature. They too described multiple humps, in this case 6, each about 10 feet long, moving purposefully down the loch. They insisted it was not a boat's wake, pointing out that 2 of them came from seafaring families and knew wakes well. But in TJ's case, a photograph was taken. At first glance, it seemed to support their story. 6 dark shapes on the surface, exactly as described. Then the analysis began. Behind the humps was a clear wake pattern. Ahead of them, another wash appeared to converge toward the same line. The conclusion was unavoidable. The humps were not part of a vast animal, but the wave pattern from a passing vessel that had already moved out of frame. For Binns, this is a sobering lesson. Here were sincere, confident witnesses, utterly convinced of what they'd seen. And yet the photographic evidence showed something entirely different. If such a discrepancy could occur in TJ's sighting, could it not also explain Moir's? Perhaps in October 1936, the 5 women east of Foyers saw an unusual pattern of waves, amplified by weather and perspective, and interpreted it through the lens of expectation. In that moment, the mind might assemble disparate shapes into a single moving creature, just as TJ's group did decades later. Believers counter that the Moir sighting lasted far too long, and the movements, racing across the loch, returning to the same spot, raising and lowering its head, are far too complex to be explained by wave action alone. Skeptics reply that the loch is a master of deception, and that human perception is less reliable than we like to admit. Closing reflection. So the Moir sighting remains where so many Nessie stories live, in the space between conviction and doubt. It is compelling, detailed, and backed by multiple witnesses. It is also unrecorded by camera, unverifiable, and open to natural explanation. Ronald Binns sees it as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the strongest eyewitness testimony can falter when faced with physical evidence. To believers, it stands as one of the finest close-range encounters on record, and there the story rests, carried forward by the words of those who were there on that damp October afternoon, and by the endless ripples of debate that spread from the dark waters of Loch Ness. This channel was started as a personal project, and never for a second did I suspect it would have the success it has done. So I just want to end this video by saying a huge thank you to everyone who watches, believer and skeptic alike. And please like and subscribe, as it's free for you, but means a huge amount to me, and I will endeavour to keep bringing you the best videos I am capable of creating. Until next time, keep watching and keep wondering.